Hi, well, I'm Nikki G, and just a little bit about myself. I come from a narcissistic family system, and obviously, growing up during my childhood, being in my family of origin, I did not know what I was in. I just knew there was a lot of trauma, and I could not put my finger on it. As I got through my adolescent years, I found myself attracted to a lot of toxic and narcissistic type people. Still didn't understand what I had been in. And it wasn't until I found myself further along in my life in five different cults in my life. And the last cult was the one that said, okay, let's figure out what's going on, Nikki. And started to educate myself and realize how much abuse and toxicity I was around. And it caused me to basically go back and just look at different seasons of my life. And it basically had me pull a thread and go all the way back to childhood. I was raised in somewhat loving family, but very religious. And in that upbringing, a lot of my voice, a lot of my intuition was squelched. And I did not understand the difference between someone who could be predatorial, someone who could be safe, someone who could really show love. And I found myself searching for what I thought would be love, but I wound up finding the same type of familiarness that was in my family of origin. So after all of that trauma, all that abuse, and the last cult I was in, I said, okay, I really need to understand what is going on. And that led me on a journey to heal not only for myself, but I'm also a mom of a 22-year-old daughter. And I was a single mom at the time. And I said, well, I need to survive and I need to thrive for my daughter. I want to be here for her. And in that desire and that resilience, I found myself understanding and unpacking a whole lot, not without tears, not without anguish, not without, oh my gosh, what have I been through? But I was committed to really understanding religious trauma, understanding cults and how they operate, and understanding narcissistic family systems. Initially, it was just for myself and my daughter, but I never thought in a million years that I would find myself doing the work that I'm doing now. And so I would say about 3 years ago, on a social media platform that came to light during the pandemic, it's called Clubhouse. I don't know if anybody's familiar, but it's a social media app, and it was filled with different rooms with different titles. And I started to go on there. I mean, we couldn't go outside. We were all quarantined at the time. And I found myself connecting with people who've been through narcissistic abuse. And I just started sharing a little bit of my story and started sharing about the spiritual abuse, the religious abuse I had been through. And people were like, wait a minute, I've been through that. I've been through that. And so I found myself starting a club on Clubhouse called Spiritual Abuse and Cults. And we unpacked all these themes that I have experienced. And in that, I said, you know what? I didn't think I want to do this, but I found myself saying, I feel like this is what I'm supposed to do in this season. So I didn't want to just move off of experience only or reading a whole bunch of books. So I went and got some training. And then I became a certified trauma recovery coach. And now I serve clients in those areas: narcissism, religious trauma, and cult involvement. And I enjoy educating and speaking and coaching people and empowering them to know that there is hope after experiencing religious trauma, that you can move forward with your life. The healing process may be a little tedious, maybe a little long, but it's okay. You can find happiness, even though we've been through some horrific things. So that's a little bit about my story. What I'm doing presently is, because this has been such a theme for not only people that have come through toxic churches, high demand groups, cultic groups, but my heart started to ache for the Black community. I realized there were not a lot of resources available for those in the Black community concerning religious trauma. So myself and a couple of my colleagues, the beginning of this year, we started a podcast called Surviving the Black Church Podcast. So we finished season one. Season two will be here next year. But we also started another work that is literally brand new, and it's called Black Religious Trauma Recovery Network. And this will be another extension of the podcast, where we will be servicing and resourcing and supporting those in the Black community who have been through some of these horrific experiences, such as myself, but they don't really know where to go, or they feel like they don't fit in non-Black supportive communities to deal with religious trauma. So I'm kind of busy with that. I'm also on the board of directors. I'm the chair for Tears of Eden. It is an organization that exists about 3 or 4 years old now, to support those who've been through spiritual abuse in the evangelical community. And we've been doing some awesome work. We just had our first retreat about a couple of months ago, and we merged with a group called I Got Out, and they service those who come out of cults and how to empower them to tell their stories after surviving cultic experiences. So that was phenomenal. And as you can see, I'm pretty busy. I have my own coaching as well, but my heart is to make resources available as much as possible, because I know what it was like for me to try to recover, and I really didn't know where to go. Obviously, for those that are unfamiliar, just a quick definition about what is religious trauma. It's a psychological and emotional distress that results from harmful, traumatic experiences, beliefs, teaching, expressions of faith, practices within a religious setting, more particularly within the church. And so and I think that's the key thing that a lot of people forget, that it is physiological. Some people think, oh, religious trauma. Oh, in my community, they refer it to as church hurt. So, oh, you just got hurt a little bit. Oh, just pray a little bit more, have a little bit more faith. You just maybe need to fast and pray and you'll be okay. Those are the things that people offer, that those who don't know, rather, they offer those options, but they don't realize it is physiological. The trauma is in the body. And I'm not, putting anyone down that offer those resources, but you still have to work it out in your body. You still have to connect with yourself, which trauma is coined the great disconnector. So, helping anyone, any human that's been through religious trauma, because I don't just service the Black community, I serve humanity as much as I am able to when it comes to recovery. But in particular, when it comes to the Black community, it is so important because the church has played such a significant role um, on our community. There's a statistic that was put out by the Pew Research, and 8 out of 10 Black Americans in this country, 8 out of 10 identify as Christian. So that's a big number. So if 8 out of 10 identify as Christian, and let's say within that eight, now this is a made up number, this is not pew. Let's say within that eight, there was 3 or 4 that experienced religious trauma and they're looking for resources. They may not be able to find them, or they may be looking for resources within the Black community, and oftentimes they don't find that. And so it's extremely important to start to have the conversations about how this trauma is impacting us and how we as a community can be resourced. Um, it is a big role. It does play a big part in how we do things. Historically, and I don't know if a lot of people are aware of this, when Black people were brought to America and were enslaved, Christianity was given in exchange for whatever form of spirituality many now African Americans had. So they were removed from their forms of spirituality and now given Christianity. And it was also used as a tool to keep Blacks submissive and obedient. And it created this mentality that God does not care about us. Maybe he doesn't. It created this mentality that he cares about those who are oppressing us, but what about us? And so historically, there are roots that causes us to have to unpack it as we unpack religious trauma. We can't just stop at what happened in our specific church. Sometimes we have to go to our family, generational line, and even all the way back to really start to uncover a lot of these intersectionalities. The Black community, though, for a lot during that time, especially during slavery and Jim Crow, many learned how to read. I don't know if a lot of people know this, but many learned how to read through the Bible. That was the first book that they used to learn how to read. So the root system is so deep. If that same Bible taught great, 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 great grandma how to read, and now someone has been in a church where that same Bible was used as a weapon to abuse, it is very conflicting. And it can often cause cognitive dissonance for an individual and a survivor, you know. Also, Christianity has really influenced the Black church. You hear gospel music come out, and even a lot of R&B and secular music has come out of and has its origin in the Black church. And generationally, it's not just, okay, let's say I'm using myself as an example. Okay, Nikki can't go back to church anymore because she's just been, you heard my story, she's been just so traumatized. Well, how does my grandmother look at that? How does my great grandfather look at that? How can I even coexist with them if they know that this is what I feel is safety for me now? And so the generational ties can cause many to feel like they can't start to deconstruct or navigate through the religious trauma. And then there's lack of education and awareness. So these are some of the reasons why it is very important to have these discussions. I am so appreciative for this platform, for you and Karl allowing this type of conversation to be had, because the more we understand each other, the more empathy we can have for one another, the more we can support one another. But again, some of these may seem similar to any person that has experienced religious trauma. And there are similarities. There are a lot of similarities. Culturally, it just looks different. And the weight of pain and anguish just looks different. So, an example, guilt and shame. Many people who are religious trauma survivors, cult survivors, they feel that, right? But in the Black community, many individuals feel guilt and shame related to no longer being able to consume religious teachings anymore, attend church the way that their loved ones were doing. They feel so disconnected from God, and then they feel ashamed to be around their friends that are still, quote unquote, on fire for God. And they're not on fire anymore. They're trying to grapple with what happened, why did it happen, what's wrong with me. My friends that I used to have, I can't connect with them anymore. I this music, these teachings are so embedded in my whole cultural identity. For me to pull away from this is to pull away from a part of my blackness. And so how do I, navigate between these complexities? Oftentimes religious survivors will go back because they can't imagine sustaining themselves outside of the fold because it just has too many intersectionalities. Again, another one is social isolation. So in the Black community, isolation, and I kind of alluded to this already, family, church folks, friends, those survivors feel that they're going to be ridiculed, that they're going to be judged and labeled as, oh, that's so and so. She fell away from God. She's not walking with God anymore. It's almost as if we feel like we had spiritual leprosy. And now the cousin doesn't want to come around anymore. Or if they do come around, they're very vocal, very judgmental. I say they pull out their scripture gun and they're ready to shoot it at us because we can't find safety in the church anymore. Or even perhaps for some in that particular faith anymore. They also say things such as, you should just forgive and God will do the rest. So just come on back. There's a lot of scriptural reference that you hear, and it impedes on one's ability, their mental health ability, their emotional stability. We hear things like in the Black community, you don't give the devil any room to take you away from God. You've been out of church too long, baby. Come on back. It's all right. Come on back. God's going to protect you. Or, there is safety in the house of God. Outside of his house, you are exposed, and potentially the enemy can take over and, do things. So these type of things are so invalidating. It almost traumatizes the survivor. But this is so typical in the Black community. The forgiveness piece is very, very a big part of it. You want God to forgive you, you need to forgive your abusers. Anyway, that's probably just a little offense. Turn the other cheek. Again, other ethnicities may hear the same thing, but the impact and the weight is even harder for us. Anxiety, flashbacks, depression, the doctrine of hell is preached a lot in the Black community, more so than other communities. I don't have any stats on that, but most Black churches, the doctrine of hell is in the fabric of everything. And it sometimes can be used as a mechanism of controlling behavior. Well, if you don't do what the pastor asks, hell is around the corner. If you don't tithe enough, if you don't give enough, if you don't serve enough as far as free labor, the mention of hell. And I know people like, well, how does that correlate? Trust me, they find a way to try to make it make sense. But because of that, when people leave the fold for safety, because a lot of survivors, they don't want to leave. They want to maintain a relationship with God, but they feel like they have no choice. The abuse has been surmountable and they need to be safe. But when they leave, they have reoccurring nightmares. They, talking about, I'm going to go to hell if I'm out too long from church, and the fear and the depression, it can overtake them. And so it can really get hard for them to maintain any type of emotional or physical health. And so, these are just some of the ways, loss of trust of themselves, of God, of others, of religious institutions, and then loss of their identity. Who am I? I used to be the prayer warrior in church. I used to be the prophetic voice. I used to be the dream interpreter. I ran children's church. What about those little kids? I'm not there anymore. What are they going to think? Who am I outside of these labels? I don't know anymore. And so these type of things pounce on people as they're trying to navigate. And then you have to work, you have a family, you have a spouse perhaps, and it's just a lot to navigate. even up to the leadership. Many don't trust the mental health community. Many feel like if you need to go to any mental health professional, then that is an indictment against God's power and his ability to heal you. If you feel depressed, then that is the enemy and his thoughts trying to come and take over your mind. All you have to do is put on the mind of Christ. And they don't understand that for some, especially after religious trauma, a lot of the disorders, maybe it's generalized anxiety, maybe it is unspecified depression, maybe it's religious scrupulosity, which is religious OCD, where you just fear that you are going to sin and disappoint God all the time. And it becomes obsessive compulsive, that there's so much shame on you. And so when someone's dealing with something that's severe, praying it away, fasting it away, reading the Bible from cover to cover may not be sufficient, you know? And so in the Black community, that is deemed a last resort, if it even is a resort at all. What the remedy is, come to the altar. Let the leaders apply oil upon you. Let's pray the demon off, which sounds crazy, but I'm just being honest. There's a lot of that. So you have a lot of young people who are starting to make sense of what's happening in a lot of churches. And they're like, hey, mom, dad, I'm having these thoughts. I'm having these emotions. I would like to see a mental health professional. And they're like, that's a lie from the pit of hell. You need to come back to church. I'm going to tell pastor, he's going to come and lay hands on you. You'll be all right. And this is very, very typical in the Black community, because go all the way back to slavery. All we knew was God got us out of slavery. He will get us out of whatever happens now. Even if we still feel afflicted and there's so many systemic traumatic things that happen to us as a people, if God can't do it, it's not going to be done. And I'm not saying that's wrong, but the likelihood of being open to other resources is very hard, especially for the older generation. Again, limited access to resources. If you have that stigma, and 8 out of 10 Black Americans identify as Christian, now I can't assume that 8 are all against mental health resources and what is available to help those who are hurting mentally and psychologically. But our community, we don't have conferences like this. Our community, not yet, not yet. We don't have a lot of the mental health therapists that we would like, that are experts in this field. Within the mental health community, if you say 100%, 4 to 5% are Black Americans. So if most Black Americans or the Black community feels safer with someone that looks like them, you only have 4 to 5% therapists. So that is extremely hard, because our resources are limited. But I often encourage people I connect with, survivors, don't limit yourself to just what is in the Black community. There are so many resources out there available that is helpful. I know for some, they may not ever be able to make that jump. But for me, because I, at that point, was so desperate, I wanted to get better so much. I'm like, I don't care what they look like, if they're a frog, if it's Elmo, do you have resources for me, you know? And that helped me to meet a lot of amazing human beings on this planet, that I cherish to this day, that I work with to this day. And so my heart is to bring some of those resources into my community, especially for the ones that would never venture out. But, you know, resources is, even research is very limited on what religious trauma looks like in our community. We're included a little bit, but there's not a lot of data. You know, family dynamics are another challenge. Like I said earlier, you know, if you live in a household where everybody's religious, but you've been through abuse and trauma, it is very hard to coexist in that environment. You hear worship music played in the house, in the car. You hear prayer and intercession throughout the house. And for some survivors, that may be triggering. Balancing spirituality, balancing, I have a relationship with God and I have my faith, but I need to be healed too. So I can't go to the church right now because it doesn't feel safe, but I feel isolated and alone. I want to connect with God again, but I don't know if He loves me anymore after what I've been through. So that cognitive dissonance can be so overwhelming for many in the Black community that are navigating through this. Some of them are, similar to what I would say to any religious trauma survivor. But the first one I would say is be compassionate and kind to yourself. What you experience is not your fault. For many of us, we just wanted to love God. We wanted to know more about God. We wanted to love people. We wanted to be of service. And then this happened. And then scriptures were manipulated and taught to us. Our behavior was controlled. Our emotions were controlled. Some of us were shunned and embarrassed. We went through all these things and we were like, why me? It's not your fault. Understand that, most importantly. Then I would encourage people, as you are able, as your nervous system allows you, educate yourself. It is so important to understand what you experience. The more I started to learn on my own, the more I started to realize this really wasn't my fault. Oh, wow. Like this is something that I did not understand. But this is something I can work through to be healed. So I read the books. I went on YouTube and watched a lot of people in the church and outside of the church who were speaking about it. And during that time, it was very limited. I went to therapy. Although my therapist did not know about religious trauma or cults or spiritual abuse, at that time when I came out of my last cult, my PTSD, was so acute, I needed to be in front of a therapist. But once it became more stable, I was able to continue to educate myself, even though some of the therapists I connected with did not have that expertise, because in my mind, this will not define the rest of my life. I have so much more to love, to learn, to give, and I may not know the path forward, but there's still more chapters in my life yet to be written. And I'm going to be patient with myself. I'm going to learn what I can, and I'm going to try to apply it. So I would encourage people to educate yourself. And social media can be not good, but then it can be helpful and good. So I would tell people, be wise, but listen to other survivors' stories. It will validate you. It would encourage you. It will let you know you're not alone, unfortunately, with this particular abuse and trauma. But that if someone else, you can hear the strength from that survivor, it can help encourage you and lift your spirits as well. I would say there, connect with Black mental health organizations. The Association of Black Psychologists is one. Black Mental Health Alliance is another. I'll put a plug in for what I'm doing with my other colleagues. We just begun the Black Religious Trauma Recovery Network. And what we do for now is we are offering twice a month in events, online events where people can come in, Black, white, green, yellow, doesn't matter, but particularly for the Black community. And if you're non-Black, that you have a heart for the Black community, you want to learn. If you're a mental health professional, you want to learn how you can resource your clients. But we have different topics. We're having one this Thursday called, "Are you sure it's really church hurt?" Because that is used a lot in the Black community versus religious trauma versus spiritual abuse. And that is used to spiritually bypass the actual trauma and abuse. So we have these events twice a month, and we will be able to give that as a resource to the community for those who want to know. Healing circles and support groups. Black people, we are very tribal. We love gathering. We love the energy and the resilience and the strength that we get when we gather. even sometimes it becomes dysfunctional. There's just something about when we gather. And so there are healing circles where you're able to be your brother's keeper, your sister's keeper, to encourage one another, to be vulnerable. I know right now, I remember this one survivor said, Nikki, where are the support groups for us? And our network is working on that to perhaps be able to offer that next year. We're just getting started with things. So that is on the docket for what we want to offer, where we can speak our language, we can speak the cultural references, and we can be resourced and encouraged. Storytelling. We as a people, we are very demonstrative. We love to tell stories, even in the way Black preachers preach. We are very into taking the text, breaking it down, and telling it in such a way that is compelling. Now, that can be helpful, that can be manipulative. A whole nother story for another day. But there is something in the fabric of who we are, that there is power when we tell and share our stories. That's for everybody, but particularly for us, we receive more when we hear stories versus a lot of information. I'm encouraging survivors to educate themselves. I'm also encouraging organizations and individuals to educate themselves. Educate, I know right now, like I said, there are not a lot of statistics. Pew Research has been doing a phenomenal job, at least starting that process. I encourage people to look at the stats. That is a weighty stat, in my opinion. 8 out of 10 Black Americans identify as Christians. So how many of that 8 are going through religious trauma right now? And if you are an organization, what can you do to create resources that will be able to service those, and particularly the church? If you are an individual, you may not have been through a religious trauma, but that doesn't mean your friend and her experiences is not real, or your brother, his experiences are not real. Specifically to individuals, I want to encourage you to be with the survivor where they are, if you are able. Some are not. And I know that may sound harsh, but some, because of where they are spiritually, they may look at a person that's going through that as, I can't touch you right now. You are questioning things that I'm choosing not to question. I'm just being obedient. You are, walking through a process that I am unfamiliar. Love you, but I can't connect with you right now. But I want to encourage people like that and others. Religious trauma is real. It is very debilitating. And a lot of survivors, what we really want the most when we're going through that is people that will hold our hand, people that won't judge us, people that say, I'm sorry this happened to you. I hear you. I believe you. How can I support you? If the survivor says, hey, can you not quote scriptures at me every time I try to talk? Listen to them. You may feel like, hey, if I'm quoting scripture to them, then they'll snap out of it. It's nothing to snap out of. This is real. It's not in their head. They didn't imagine it. The trauma's in their body. Take them out for coffee. Give them a card, a gift certificate to get a massage. Text them every now and then and say, hey, you're not alone. I don't understand everything, but I'm not going anywhere. And if you don't understand, get to Googling. There are resources even more so now than when I first went through understanding, my cult's experience and things of that nature. Show empathy. Listen. Organizations, you have the resources, you have the money power, you network. Connect with ministries and groups and organizations that are already doing the work. You don't have to reinvent the wheel. Come alongside Karl and Laura. Come alongside those the speakers that are part of this conference, and find out what they're doing and say, how can I support you? What do you need to help what you're doing spread and support others? It doesn't have to be complicated, but the key ingredient is empathy. And even though many may not understand this complexity called religious trauma, if you care on a human level, no matter what color, no matter where they're from, how they speak, it doesn't, on a human level, if you can hear what a survivor goes through while they're enduring the abuse and even after, you would want to help, you would want to serve, you would want to resource them. So for churches, specifically for the Black community, some of this is Black community, some of this is just religious trauma survivors as well. Diverse leadership is so important. For us, when we see someone that looks like us, it just creates such a level of safety. Now, that doesn't mean that that person is safe. We're not a monolith. We don't all think alike. But for us, in our body, it's like the likelihood that that person will understand my experience, and I don't have to spend so much time explaining the cultural differences. I can just start right from, child, the pastor told me that if I don't come back for the third service, that I couldn't come back to the church anymore. Like, you want to be able to share that, and the other person say, oh, I know someone that went through that too. So having Black people on leadership, Black people in the mental health capacity for those churches that have joined arms with mental health professionals, having those who are qualified, those who have experienced this, those who are resourced, come alongside and let's bring them on staff. Let's get them on your boards. Let's get them as part of conferences that you do. It is so important for Black Americans who've experienced religious trauma to see faces like them. And then let's get some training within the churches. Okay, let's get some cultural competent training that's trauma informed, trauma responsive. Okay, with diversity if possible. Bring it in the church. If the church wants to be the light and the salt of the world, then we have to be able to resource. And this is a problem. Whether the church wants to admit it or not, this is a problem. And many survivors are looking, because it's, on one hand, people want to judge people that say, I can't do the church anymore. But on the other hand, how can you judge if you have not created resources for those to remain in the church and actually be assisted? So if you care about this issue that is plaguing many churches, I encourage leaders to find resources and people to get that training, to lock arms with organizations that are already doing that. Have support groups, okay? Have support groups for people who are experiencing this. And I know that may seem scary, but I want to really talk to the leaders that say, listen, I'm not a perfect pastor, I'm not a perfect leader, but I care. I don't like to see people outside of the church spiritually bleeding out because of what happened at some other place, at some other church. I want to be a help and a resource. So those that have that, that means when you have support groups, when you begin to bring this to your churches and talk about it, there's going to be some stuff that people don't want to hear. But how can people heal if they don't acknowledge what has happened? And so this is becoming and has become a cancer, so to speak, metaphorically, within the churches. So we need the training. We need the support group. We need the open dialogue. And when survivors come forward, they're not judged. They are not shamed. They're not considered, whistleblowers, or they're not considered people who complain a lot. They are considered human, and they've been through some real tough things. Thank you for taking time to listen to us, to all the beautiful speakers on this panel, to what we have to say. Women, we are powerful beings. We have so much to say. We're intuitive. We see, we understand, and we have a voice, right? And I'm not saying this in a competitive sense between man or woman. I'm just saying we matter. We matter in the church. We matter in the home. We matter outside of the church. And these things that we've been talking about, they're important. And for the most part, if you think of just the typical American church, Black, white, Korean, Hispanic, it doesn't matter. Most men are at the helm of churches. And so, for those who have an empathetic heart, because I refuse to believe that every male leader or pastor or apostle, whatever label you carry, I refuse to believe that all are not empathetic and all are turning a blind eye. I know there are some out here, like Karl, that care, that are saying enough is enough, that are saying, you know what? It's time we bring the women forward. It's time that we hear. So, for men in particular, in the pews, in the church in general, not necessarily leaders, the men that are in the church, the ones that bring their wives and their daughters and their children to church, it's time for self reflection. You may say, well, that's not me. I haven't done anything like that. So what do I have to worry about? But you know what? Your brother two pews behind you might be engaging in some of this behavior. Religious trauma is not just leader to congregant. Religious trauma can take place right in a marriage. You can have a husband that uses scriptures to control and lord over their wife, to silence her so she cannot hear. So this is a time for all men, whether this is something that you have partaken of or not, to reflect, to understand your own biases, to understand your own privileges and your preoccupation to different things where you've learned the man is the leader everywhere. So that means women don't have place, women don't have voice. I don't think that that's true. We have something to say. Open conversation like this conference, not trying to put anything on you guys, Karl and Laura, but this is something that you might want to continue to do until the message continues to resound, until the conversations go beyond just online, but in the pews, in the Bible study time, outside in the children's church where you're raising your children not to be male dominant or a part of a patriarchal system, but you're raising your sons to honor the women and prefer them when they have something to say that is healing and of importance and wise for situations. Be an ally. Like I said, there may be some that says, I've never taken part of that, and my heart grieves when I see it. So get with another brother that feels the same way, and then get with another brother that feels the same way. And then you form a males group and say, how can we start tearing down this patriarchal system and allow the women to come forward? Religious trauma is not just women, it's also male. But statistically, women are the ones that are enduring religious trauma more than the males. So what are we going to do about that statistic? We got to understand the research, acknowledge what has happened, remove the shame so that we can start moving forward solutions and healing and recovery. We want to challenge stereotypes. So what grandpa and great grandpa used to do it this way. They used to pastor the church that way. They used to lead the men's group and the men's choir that way. You don't have to, especially if you're aware. You got 4 or 5 daughters right in your house, and you don't want them to be under that same weight that you grew up under. Challenge the stereotypes, challenge the status quo, and then mentor this next generation and even mentor your own peers. So I say that for the men, but the leaders got to apply all of those things and then lead by example. You can be a catalyst for change. Unfortunately, I can't say that religious abuse and spiritual abuse and cults are going anywhere. We live in a world where there's both dark and light. We live in a world where some people are not satisfied with just supporting and empower people. Some people, because of a whole lot of reasons, that's a 5-hour conversation as to why. But some people actually are power hungry. They want to control. They want to manipulate. They want to dominate. And so this problem is going to be around. So how do we start creating a shift? And it's going to take the men in leadership to lead by example, to say, you know what? Sister so-and-so, she has a message of healing and hope. I'm not preaching this Sunday. I'm going to allow her to come up here. and she's going to speak on behalf to the congregation. And then maybe next month, I'm going to start doing a women's thing where every month one woman gets to come up and let's start, that may start slow, that's okay, but start leading by example, right? Promote inclusive leadership practices that actively involve women. And then in the Black community, Black folks who have a voice, who have something to say, who are maybe mental health professionals, but they still hold on to their faith as well. Allow them to set up shops on a Saturday and have training for people in the church who want to know more. It is possible for those who have a connection with God and their faith to maintain that faith and to get the help and the resources that you need on a mental health capacity. So that collaboration is something to move forward to. But the key is to the leaders. Is that what you really want? Do you really want that? Because doing things like this that I'm suggesting will require, for those who do this, it's not everybody, for you to remove some of the holds. I know a lot of leaders, they revel in the fact that their members, they're doing this with the members. In order for you to allow Black voices to be heard, women's voices to be heard, little girls' voices to be heard, this is going to have to come down. And you're going to have to honor people on a human level, and that they don't belong to you. They belong to their creator. And so if that is your heart, then some of these things I'm talking about, it won't be so hard to do. But if inside of you, you're still wrestling with the power dynamics, you're still wrestling with the patriarchal messages that's been indoctrinated in you from 5, 6 generations back, I'm not judging you, but I implore you to work through that. I implore you to acknowledge that. I implore you to actually start to heal from that, so that you can lead people in a way that is honoring, empowering, and not controlling and dominating and abusive. So to the males, we appreciate you. We need you, but you need us too. I just want to thank everyone for being a part of this beautiful online conference. Thank you for taking time to even want to know what women have to say about religious trauma. It is important. I encourage you to share this online conference with leaders, with pastors, with people in the Black community that you may know, and say, hey, there's somebody on there that kind of understands what you're going through. I am not perfect. I am still healing myself. All the work that I'm doing, I haven't stopped my own healing. And I'm glad about that, because, I don't want to become what I came out of. You understand what I'm saying? So the humility is, I speak before you, I do this work. Then I have my own therapist and I have my own support group to connect with to make sure that I continue to heal. But you matter, your voices matter. And for those women who've always had something on the inside of them to say and to help and to support humanity in the church and outside of the church, and your voice has been squelched and suppressed because of whatever connections within the church or even within your own home, I want to encourage you to connect back with that voice, connect back with that message. I don't believe that it's dead in many of you. I believe it's still alive. And maybe this conference is what you needed to inspire you to tap back in. And once you do, you'll find where you're supposed to share it, when you're supposed to share it, and how you're supposed to share it. But we just want to thank you for just being here and standing with Karl and Laura. And I encourage you to continue to support what they're doing. And hopefully we'll see you at another conference.